Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with you on this Thursday, May the 23rd. Thanks for watching Alaska Weather and joining us tonight for more information from parts of Alaska where you live, including flood warnings around AKwx and on the AKwx River, and also some drought information around southeast. We'll get to that here in just a minute. Remember, your latest forecast information is just a phone call or a click away. You can find us on mobile.weather.gov. It'll do a lot better on your mobile device, especially in poor reception or slow bandwidth areas there, so check that out, mobile.weather.gov. Weather.gov/Alaska on your PC or tablet might work okay. The files are going to be bigger, the images will be bigger, load time probably a little bit slower if you're on a slow connection. 1-800-472-0391 is how you find us on the Alaska Weather Information Line on the phone. And if you can't find what you're looking for, let me know. david.snider@noaa.gov, and I'm pleased to serve you any way I possibly can. Let's take a look first at Live and Good. You're looking to the south and west into the interior and the Tanana Valley out this way, and with that we see a few showers, maybe a little bit of a thunderclap or two developing out there. Rain and thunder was developing around some of the higher terrain around the Tanana Valley earlier today. Nothing moving right over Live and Good as of this picture, though. So that's the FAA weather camera, and thanks to our partners there, the Federal Aviation Administration. As we look up toward the AKwx Valley, we're still monitoring a flood warning there around AKwx. Now, we don't have a whole lot of new information there, but the water was coming up. There was some flooding around some of the low-lying terrain. We saw some good video there showing some of that minor flooding around the town, and hopefully it's not turned into anything worse than that at this point. But water around the AKwx is certainly running high, and we expect that trend to continue as it moves downstream toward Hughes and Hughes, I should say first. So as you are seeing those changes there, make sure you're passing that information on to your local authorities so they can relay that to the River Forecast Center hydrologists. If you get a request for information, that really does help us do a better job and alert more people downstream that could be in the way of some of that higher water. We do expect the water to continue to rise downstream as we go into the weekend. So make sure you're prepared for that, and if you can do anything to get your stuff out of the way and up to higher ground in the region, that would be a really smart idea at this point. The snow melt that has been taking place up in the Brooks Range is responsible for this. It's not an ice jam. It is a lot of excessive melting due to the very warm weather that we've seen over the last week or so in the region, especially the last couple of days. That trend's going to continue and will continue until that really heavy snowpack has been melted away, and that should start to improve perhaps early next week, but not before that surge of water is starting to move down the AKwx River from AKwx, where we're seeing flooding now, down to Hughes, and then eventually down to Hughes. Let's take a look at the breakup map, and as you'll notice, there's not a whole lot of activity there now south of the Brooks Range. We're still seeing a few rivers out across the western parts of the interior that are looking at least some or mostly open, and we're seeing that most of the Sag Park right now are listed as mostly open. So we probably won't be talking about the breakup map a whole lot longer. It's mainly focused now on the North Slope rivers there. And we're seeing that melt water work out into the sea ice, which is having some effects on removing some of the sea ice as well. Fire danger continues to grow. Not a big change from yesterday, really, but the upper Tanana Flats, the upper Tanana Valley, the Yukon Flats, as well as the Copper River Valley and around the Matanuska-Susitna Valley region and the forelands of the Kenai Peninsula, all looking at increased fire danger, as well as parts in southwest and the Kobuk and Noatak valleys, looking at growing fire danger as conditions have been unsettled, but they haven't been terribly wet across the region. So be careful with fire, especially as we're going into a weekend where many folks like to go out a little bit further and perhaps light the fire. Now, as far as dry conditions go, this is the first time in the Drought Monitor's history, and forgive me, I don't know exactly what date it started. I want to say the 90s, but can't be too sure there. That we have seen a listing of extreme drought in southern parts of southeast. First time. Not the first time it's happened, though. We know of a drier period in the late 90s to the late 80s to the late 90s where it was extraordinarily dry. And for those of you not in southeast, you're going, isn't that a rainforest? Shouldn't they be very wet? Yeah, absolutely, you're right. It's also the drought level and the drought monitor is a comparison to what is normal amounts of precipitation and then how far removed from that are you. So it could still be raining, and it might even be raining heavily at times when rain moves through, but it hasn't caught conditions back up to that normal or near normal level that would take it out of that extreme drought situation. So this is impacting hydropower, drinking water, of course, and for communities there like Heidelberg, Ketchikan, south of Petersburg. Even Petersburg, though, is in a severe drought listing. And then north of that up toward Juneau, at least some abnormally dry conditions. All of this impacts everyone's life in some way, but the greatest impacts that we know about, of course, are down here around Ketchikan, Heidelberg, and Metlakatla. So keep that in mind there, and we'll be watching for more rain, although it does look like in the next couple days conditions will be moving toward a drier setup in southeast. Here's a look at the picture across the entirety of Alaska today, and low pressure pretty clear to pick out. You can see that circulation happening right around Bristol Bay there as it's swinging a front northward into south central, southwest, into southeastern Alaska. Behind that, high pressure is developing here, but we've got another low pretty much in the wake of the current low pressure system working into southwestern Alaska. And you can also see ample moisture and also the warm air it is taking with it to the north slope. So that's really having a big impact on that snowmelt in places like AKwx as we've seen, and certainly the sea ice that's sitting across the north slope and across southwest or northwestern parts of the coast. High pressure sitting across the Bering Sea. Underneath that, a lot of low stratus, certainly a lot of fog in the region. Expect that to continue as we head into the weekend. So most of our storm track will focus from areas around the Alaska Peninsula to Bristol Bay out towards southwest. And then it looks like we're going to develop a little bit of a better surge of a southerly flow working into south central, which will probably bring in a better opportunity for rain as we get into Saturday and Sunday. So if you've got outside plans, whether you're going to the high country, you're going camping, you're going to fish camp, all that, especially in south central and especially along, let's say the Kenai Fjords region to Seward, Homer, Prince William Sound, Kodiak, you're looking at wet weather developing. So what you see in the first part of the weekend, it's not going to be what you see when you finish it up and try to pack it out. As you look in southeast, though, drier conditions are expected as we get into tonight and tomorrow. We do have a very weak wave working through right now. You can barely detect it on the satellite picture here, but there is a front. We'll go ahead and map that on for you. And that is squeezing out showers and probably a lot of clouds. A little bit of a breeze working through the next 24 hours for you, but it doesn't look like we're going to move into a very wet situation because high pressure is working closer to southeast. So as we go ahead in time, it does look like things are going to be drying up in southeast, and temperatures as a result are going up. And again, that's not great for drought conditions there as you're talking about extreme drought in southern parts of southeast. For the interior today, low pressure sitting right around the Alcan border close to Eagle, and with that, clouds have been building up around the higher terrain near Fairbanks. Showers and thunderstorms have been popping up there. You've probably seen some of those clouds out across southwest. Some light rainfall there around the southwest and Bristol Bay coastal communities up toward Bethel. High pressure sitting around St. Matthew and west of St. Paul and St. George. 1,027 millibars there, and low pressure sitting across the North Pacific, pulling in some warmer air. Now that is going to occlude later tonight. That's that colder air catching up with the warm air and just kind of mixing it up a little bit more. 999 millibars for you. High pressure sitting across the southern Gulf, driving in a little bit more of a southerly flow. So we'll see some showers across the Gulf Coast communities, a few showers maybe across southeast, a much better chance for showers and thunderstorms across the western part of the Yukon into the Alcan border, and probably a few remaining early in the evening there for central and eastern parts of the interior. Your eyes don't deceive you. Up north, we're still looking at a rain-snow mix in some areas along the Chukchi coast. High pressure sitting west of St. Matthew will keep fog a possibility for many parts of the Bering and into the Bering Strait. Now, as we get into Friday, a little bit of a surge of cooler air is going to drop southward. As that happens, we expect to keep a lot of warmth across south central and southwest, and southeast starts to get a taste of that as high pressure is rotating in that drier air and pushing more of that instability away from you. You may see some showers closer to the mountains and over the mountains into British Columbia, but I expect to see the greatest number of thunderstorms popping up across the eastern interior, a really similar pattern to what we had today. The difference will be that cooler air dropping southward. So we might see a little more development here across places closer to the Alaska range. And you're going to notice a little bit of a reduction in that snowmelt for places like Allakaket and the Koyukuk River. That means that melting will slow down if we get just a little bit of a drop in temperature. But it's not a permanent fix, and the warmth will be back. You'll notice that front down south also moving across the eastern chain and the Alaska Peninsula. That's going to stir up the winds, probably talking about some higher gales here, but you see that threat shifts eastward a little bit more to the Kenai Peninsula, the Barren, Shelikof Strait, and Kodiak Island as we get into Saturday. Conditions continue to dry up and clear up for southeast as we get into your Saturday. And once again, a risk for some thunderstorms across the Alcan border, probably from Fort Yukon southward toward Northway, maybe Delta Junction, and west of that, maybe a pop-up shower or two, but really a lot of the activity is maintained in the same old spot. The Yukon Delta, southwest, you're looking at some light rainfall, some cooler air working through the region, especially to the west as we get high pressure pushing down a little bit. You'll get some of that into the central chain. Low pressure sitting across the western chain, developing at 996 millibars, and a weak area of high pressure across the north slope, but enough to count. Looks like it could trap in some fog there, and maybe a few showers of rain and snow along the Chukchi coast, and maybe just to the east into places like Prudhoe Bay, Dead Horse, and Utqiagvik. Let's take a look at your temperatures there. We're talking about a lot of heat tonight, upper 40s and low 50s for the interior, 30s and 40s for the Kobuk, Noatak valleys down to the Koyukuk. And southwest, you're looking at low to mid 40s there. Bethel about 42. Southeast, mid to upper 40s for you. Ketchikan, Craig, about 46 degrees or so. Kodiak 44, about what we'll see here in Anchorage. Lower to mid 40s for the chain. And out across the Alaska Peninsula at Sandpoint 42. A high of 48 tomorrow, 61 around King Salmon, 56 in Dillingham, 58 in Bethel. Mid to upper 60s for many around Fairbanks up toward Fort Yukon. 71 degrees there, a blistering hot day for you. Mid to upper 30s for the North Slope, 37 for our friends watching in Shishmaref tonight. Mid to upper 50s for many in Southeast. Haines, Skagway could top out in the 60s. Overnight lows Saturday morning, 40s for most areas there, closer to 50 around Haines and Skagway. Mid 40s for Prince William Sound, including Cordova, 46 in Fairbanks, 41 in Eagle. Down into the mid-20s for the North Slope, so a change from some of the cooler weather you've seen overnight. 38 degrees around Nome, 40s for Southwest, 45 in Kodiak, and highs in the interior Saturday back in the 70s.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
And on to aviation weather now. IFR is going to be fairly widespread across the North Slope and through most of the Brooks Range summits and passes all the way into the Kobuk and Noatak Valley, through Kotzebue Sound, St. Lawrence Island, the Bering Strait, and out west. And then certainly widespread across the south and eastern Bering, the Alaska Peninsula, and into the eastern Gulf. Notice MVFR also will be fairly widespread over southeast and into Prince William Sound, but you will see some breaks up and down Cook Inlet and over the Anchorage and Matsu areas, as well as some pockets of improved weather around the interior, maybe as near as Fairbanks, and then out west up and down parts of the Yukon. A lot of that will get better throughout the day on Friday. However, with the addition of sunshine, comes the opportunity for convection, especially across the 40-mile country, the upper Tanana and the upper Yukon. Out to the west, not as much of an issue with that. You'll be looking at VFR conditions around many of our western coastal villages there and into Bristol Bay, but lingering IFR around St. Paul, St. George, the Bering Strait, up the Chukchi coast, and also across most of the Gulf southeast should improve entirely. Prince William Sound and most of the Kenai Peninsula also looking for major improvements. As we get into Saturday morning, IFR encroaches from the south into Prince William Sound, over the Barrens, over Kodiak, and into the outer coast of southeast, with MVFR sneaking in just a little bit further into parts of Cross Sound and Stevens Passage. Out across the west, IFR across the Bering Strait, St. Paul, St. George, the central and eastern chain, and most of the Alaska Peninsula. VFR is maintained across most of the Yukon Valley into southwest, and IFR drops southward again into parts of the Brooks Range and North Slope, including Utqiagvik out toward Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse. That improves a little bit for the afternoon. Marginal conditions should prevail, but you get a little bit further south, that becomes a little more spotty into Kotzebue Sound and around some of our YK villages there. Some areas in the lowlands around the Kuskokwim Valley and into Bristol Bay will still be looking at MVFR and look for IFR across most of the Gulf Coast, or at least getting close to it, with marginal conditions hit and miss across the outer coast for southeast into Prince William Sound. Northern parts of Cook Inlet and most of South Central should be okay. Out to the west, IFR socked in across the Bering. Anaktuvuk Pass and Adigan Pass, we expect to see IFR to start and maybe some improvements toward marginal conditions. You'll notice similar trends as we get into your Saturday. Look for Lake Clark and Merrill Pass to hold at MVFR really most of your Friday. Rainy Pass also looking at marginal conditions. Marginal to VFR improvements expected for Windy Pass, and Isabel Pass also expected to see some improvements toward VFR by the afternoon. Mentasta Pass, we expect to see visual flight rule by the end of the day, though. A marginal start's expected, and similar trends there for Tanita Pass as we go through the end of the week. Portage Pass looks marginal to start your day. It looks like things do improve for VFR by the afternoon. Northern parts of Cook Inlet should be okay most of the day. Chilkoot and White Pass looking at VFR by the end of the day, and southeast again we'll see most of the activity or poor visibility and ceilings out across the outer coast through the rest of the weekend. There's a cold pool right here across the Wrangell-St. Elias region, but surrounding that area of low pressure we have a lot of warm air building in. You can see 8,000 foot levels coming in from the Yukon and into the central interior, and along this boundary here is where we expect to see thunderstorms, or at least the potential of convection as we go through the rest of the weekend. Out to the west, there's certainly some warmer air there as high pressure is pushing a lot of that cool air across the west. You can see the 2,000-foot freezing line, though, nosing into the Chukchi coast, and that'll add some cooler weather to the higher terrain. Icing potential there is pretty high up there, so almost didn't even put it on the map, but above 9,000 feet might have a little bit of isolated moderate across southern parts of southeast, and pretty high up. Again, watch for those levels to hold up high, but if they do drop down, this would be where we'd see it. Central and eastern chain, and also across the north and eastern Brooks Range and the eastern Beaufort Seacoast. Why? Well, we've got the jet stream that's taking a little bit of a dip across the north slope. That's allowing that little bit of a cool push to come into the northwestern parts of the interior. The main player is the Pacific Jet with a huge trough out across the North Pacific and almost an equally huge ridge across the Gulf. That is keeping things fairly active across most of the state, and plenty of clouds will continue with that. Southerly winds coming in across the Gulf and into south central. Generally over land, wind speeds are light, around 10 knots there. A stronger flow feeding into low pressure just across the outer coast and northern parts of southeast there. That's up to 50 knots. And westerlies moving over the Brooks Range at 20 knots with low pressure sitting just south of the chain. At 3,000 feet, winds coming in from the south and east over Kodiak Island, 20 to 40 there. Northeasterlies over the southern bearing. High pressures in charge of the Kenai, and wind speeds there are fairly light around it, 10 to 20 knots there, and westerlies continue over the Brooks Range as well. Northerlies working their way through southeast, anywhere from 10 to as strong as 40 knots at times. As we go into turbulence here, you'll notice once again convection is possible across the upper Yukon Valley and into the 40-mile country. Watch for a little bit of chop, generally east of Utqiagvik out toward Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse. That'll be below 4,000 feet. Around St. Paul, St. George, and the central and eastern chain, we'll see a better chance for at least some considerable moderate all the way through the Alaska Peninsula. A little bit of chop in southern southeast.
The many sides of the moon. Hey there, stargazers. I'm James Albury, director of the Kika Silva Pla Planetarium in Gainesville, Florida.
And I'm Dehne Regis, astronomer for the Cincinnati Observatory. We're here to help you find your way around the sky tonight. Whether it's a slim crescent, a big gibbous, or even full, I always like seeing the moon in the night sky.
But it's not the easiest thing in the universe to understand. It goes through phases, changes its position from night to night, and is even visible during the daytime.
And one of the biggest confusions is what is the dark side of the moon and what is the far side of the moon?
They are not the same thing. So this week, we're going to take you up 240,000 miles off Earth to see all the sides of the moon.
Let's show you. We often think that the moon is only visible at night. This isn't exactly true. In fact, this week you'll see the moon only in the morning sky.
Here we have our sky set up for May 23rd at 5 a.m., facing southward. That morning, the waning gibbous moon will be near a bright yellow-looking star.
It's not actually a star, but is in fact the ring planet Saturn. You can see Saturn every morning before sunrise, and it will slowly make its way to the evening sky later this summer.
But let's watch the moon move from morning to morning. Here it is on May 24th, May 25th, May 26th. Each morning it shifted to the left or toward the east, and the phase changed. It's waning, meaning there is less light visible on the moon each day while the dark side increases.
Waning moons are more easily seen in the morning sky after midnight. And on May 26th, for example, you'll even be able to find it at 7 a.m. and later, even though the sun has risen.
Now, there's something else strange about the moon. Let's fly up for a closer look at the phases and the dark and light parts of the moon. Here we are facing the moon. Let's watch how the moon's phases change as seen from Earth. What do you notice?
I see the light moving from right to left and then the darkness moving from right to left.
Exactly. All the moonlight comes from the sun. But when the sun is shining on the other side, the lunar surface is all dark. That's the dark side of the moon.
So the dark side is constantly changing, but wait, we're only seeing half the moon. What's happening on the other side?
That's the far side of the moon. While the dark side of the moon is constantly changing, the far side is always the side facing away from the Earth.
We didn't know what the far side of the moon looked like until we sent spacecrafts and people around there in the 1950s and 60s. Only 21 humans have seen the far side in person. Let's go check it out. Here we are, where few people have gone before, the far side of the moon. It's weird to think that no matter what we do or where we go on Earth, we never see this side of the moon.
The first pictures from the far side of the moon came from the Soviet Union's Luna 3 spacecraft, which flew around there in 1959.
This was quite a feat, to fly 240,000 miles off Earth and circle the moon. So many of the features on the far side bear Russian names. What else do you notice?
It's not a whole lot different from the near side. Still rocky, gray, and cratered, and still desolate. But it doesn't have as many dark areas, what we call seas, like on the near side of the moon.
There were less massive impacts on the far side of the moon than on the near side. So there's only one notable sea, and it's named the Sea of Moscow. Well, I guess it paid to get there first. So there you have it, the difference between the dark side and the far side of the moon.
The dark side is always changing depending on the phase of the moon.
And the far side is always pointed away from Earth, hidden from view.
Check out the near side and lit side of the moon this week in the morning sky, and dream of flying around to the far side.
Keep looking up.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Time for a look at your sea ice edge update, and a lot of open water around the Chukchi coast down to the Bering Strait. You'll notice there's still some areas of fast ice along parts of the coastline in Norton Sound, but really the more notable spots are in the larger bays, including Port Clarence, and then also out around the upper end of Kotzebue Sound. And then north of Point Lay, all the way up toward Wainwright and Utqiagvik, we still have marginal ice, a little bit of shore fast ice around Point Lay. East of that, you get into marginal ice north of Kaktovik, and while this is melting to the west, we still have a lot of pack ice up to the north. And so as this decreases, we expect to see some of the pack ice probably caught up in the gyre, and that may move southward with time. That's not going to happen overnight, but certainly a possibility there, considering how much thicker ice is to the north of the Beaufort coast. Let's take a look at the forecast now in southeast. Generally light winds and small seas on the inside, the way we like to have it. Southerly winds 15 knots, 3-foot seas in the Lynn Canal. Northwesterlies in Clarence Strait, 15 knots and 3-foot seas there. Northwesterlies from Yakutat to Gustavus, all the way south of Sitka, outside of the Dixon entrance. 25 knots there with 11-foot seas, lighter winds up to the north. As we get into Saturday, winds diminish across the outer coast, anywhere from 10 to 20 knots, 6 to 7-foot seas there from Cross Sound all the way down toward the Dixon entrance. Winds diminish a little bit more on the inside as well. 15 knots will be maintained up around Lynn Canal, but lighter winds around Stevens Passage all the way down through the Clarence Strait. 2 to 3-foot seas on the inside for Saturday. Across Prince William Sound to the outer coast, about 10 to 15 knots will do the trick. Small seas inside of the Sound, 2-foot seas expected there. 7 to 9-foot seas across the northwestern Gulf, and south and southwesterlies coming up through Cook Inlet, anywhere from 10 to 15 knots, and 2 to 3-foot seas on Friday. Winds are going to pick up sharply, though, on Saturday, though, so be prepared for some weather changes, whether you're camping out in one of the bays or some of the protected coves around the Kenai Fjords region. Be prepared for some changes there. North and easterlies coming down through Cook Inlet will be light, but through the Barrens, 35 knots develop. 11 to 12-foot seas there, 5 to 8-foot seas across the northern Gulf. Still looking at light winds and small seas, though, inside of Prince William Sound on Saturday. Sunday, that's not going to be the case, so be prepared for changes. The Alaska Peninsula, we're looking at broad easterly flow over Kodiak Island and through the peninsula, 25 to 35 knots. 5-foot seas on the Bering Sea side, 14-foot seas there south of Sand Point to Falls Pass. So a lot more of a choppier condition the further south you go. A little bit more of a southerly push comes into Chignik, up toward Akiak and into Shelikof Strait, looking at 10 to 12-foot seas developing. Southeasterlies coming into Kodiak should develop 13-foot seas with a 30-knot wind, 35 knots through Shelikof Strait, and winds will be picking up through the Bering Sea coastal regions as well into Bristol Bay, 6 to 7-foot seas on a 25 to 30-knot wind on Saturday. For the Aleutian Chain, central and eastern areas looking at a north and easterly wind, 25 to 30 knots, 12 to 13-foot seas should be expected there. Smaller seas on the Bering Sea coast, but still coming up 7 to 9 feet there on that 25-knot wind. Lighter winds west of Kiska, but seas are coming up there as well as high pressure still in charge, but not holding the seas down all the way. Look for a northerly wind pushing through the central chain, and a lot of the gaps will be blustery. 8 to 10-foot seas expected in most of the region. A southeasterly return flow over Unalaska and Dutch Harbor. Looking for 15 to 20 there, 7 to 9-foot seas in the eastern side, and an east and northeasterly wind up to 30 knots from Kiska to Shemya on Saturday with an 11-foot sea. Down the west coast we go. Light winds under high pressure. That'll be blowing all different directions there. More of a 10 to 15-knot wind. A little bit of a stronger northeasterly wind around St. Paul and St. George. 5-foot seas there. Westerlies blowing into Norton Sound. 10 knots and 3-foot seas. Northeasterlies inside Norton Sound, 3-foot seas expected there. And northeasterlies coming through Nunivak Island, anywhere from 20 to 25. Easterlies across the Kuskokwim Delta, 30 knots with an 8-foot sea and 25 knots and 7-foot seas around St. Paul and St. George. For the North Slope, southerlies blowing through the Bering Strait and up the Chukchi Coast, more of a westerly flow working across the Beaufort, 15 to 20. Looking for 3-foot seas in some of the more open water around Kaktovik. You'll see 4-foot seas there on Saturday. Westerlies 10 to 15 and southerlies working through the Chukchi Coast 10 to 15 knots. Expect 3 to 5-foot seas at their greatest levels there. Most areas are looking at 3-foot seas through the weekend. Recapping tonight's weather, we're getting new reports of water reaching very close to the runway around Hughes. It sounds like it's within feet of the Hughes runway lights there. So thank you for your reports and your PIREPs. Those are very important and help spread the information around. High waters coming down the Koyukuk River, and because of that, a flood warning is posted now for Allakaket. That'll go through Saturday morning. We expect to see flood advisories likely in the region as we go through the weekend. So pay those close attention and remember to move away from the river there. If you can, move things away. The water will be getting higher and higher all weekend long as we go down the Koyukuk, heading for Hughes and eventually Huslia. Showers and thunderstorms will be in the region. Thanks for watching.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.